Adventures of Superman, the 18th Hole, Metropolis, Florida, 2018. It was a quiet summer in Metropolis, even though Clark Kent's alter ego Superman was keeping busy by saving people around the world from all sorts of natural disasters plaguing the planet. Well, there was going to be an unusual case for both Clark Kent and his alter ego to solve. At a very prestigious golf course in Metropolis, James Fairfax, a well-to-do businessman and part owner of the golf course, was having a few rounds of golf before he went home for the day. He was having a good game when all of a sudden he had noticed something weird around the 18th hole. Strange-looking men that don't look like members, that were around there. He tells his caddy, Mike, stay there, I'm going to go investigate. Well, after Fairfax goes to investigate what he saw around the 18th hole, he mysteriously disappeared. So did his caddy, Mike. But, of course, a man like Fairfax disappearing does not go unnoticed right away. Soon, the media was having a storm about the disappearance of Fairfax. Meanwhile, at the Daily Planet, Perry Wright, the editor-in-chief, was going through some paperwork. Then there was a knock on the door. White lifts his head up and says, "Come in." Well, the door opens up and two of the most well-known reporters for the Daily Planet come into the room. It was none other than Clark Kent and Anita Ward, Lois Lane's replacement at the Planet. The two of them shut the door, and Mr. White says, "Kent, Ward, sit down." Well, the two reporters sit down, and Mr. White says, "All right, you two, I got assignments for both of you." He goes on to assign their duties. He says, "Ward, I'm assigning you to the Fairfax story. This is big news, and I know you can handle it." Anita lets out a big smile. Then he turns over to Clark and he says, "Kent, I'm assigning you to sports. Carlson is on vacation, and I know you're a capable sports writer." Well, Clark's smile disappeared right off his face as he looked at Mr. White and says, "But Mr. White, sir, I hate sports. I'm lousy at watching sports. I lose interest very quick, sir." Well, Mr. White was not going to hear it. He tells Clark, "Kent, don't give me that bullshit. You're the best reporter there is, and you did a good job the last time Carlson went on vacation." Clark says, "Oh, great. Well, yes, sir, Mr. White. I'll do the best that I can, sir." Mr. White says, "Excellent. All right, you two have your assignments. Go." Well, Clark and Anita leave Mr. White's office. Anita says, "Don't worry, Clark. You're good at your job. That's why he gave you the sports column." Anita goes on to say, "Anyways, Clark, me and you have to go to the same place. There's a big invitational going on at Metro Club, and that's where Fairfax disappeared, so, you could drive me down to Metro Club on your way to cover the golf tournament there." Clark's like, "Well, I guess it is a plus." So the two got into Clark's car and headed off to the Metro Club. Well, at the golf tournament, it was a typical golf tournament. Quiet, everybody watching was quiet suspense. Anita was doing her job, asking all the employees and people at the course if they saw or heard anything weird before Fairfax's disappearance, while Clark was looking at the golf tournament with the same excitement and zeal as any child who's watching something he doesn't like. He was falling asleep. But by the time he got to the 18th hole, Clark remembers this is where Fairfax had disappeared at. So as the golf tournament was playing through, Clark decided to use his X-ray vision to scan around. Well, as Clark was looking around with his X-ray vision, he noticed the small hill behind the 18th hole was lead-lined. He was like, "Wait a minute, that's not normal. How comes this little hill is lead-lined? This is really suspicious," said Clark. Then he stopped scanning with his X-ray vision. But before Clark could take any action, suddenly Anita gets his attention. She says, "Clark." Clark turns to look and sees Anita, and he says, "Oh, Anita, you're back. So, what's going on?" Anita says with a high whisper, "Nothing. Nobody knows anything. Fairfax disappeared around here. Nobody knows what's going on." She then asks, "Clark, how are you holding up on your end?" Clark says, Oh, this is exciting, as exciting as watching paint dry. I wish the stupid tournament would be over already. Well, Clark got his wish as a loud crackle thunder echoed throughout the golf course. Soon the day turned very dark as a bad storm was coming in. The announcer of the tournament quickly called off the tournament and told everybody to get off the field quickly. Well, the golf course was cleared out very quickly. And Clark and Anita were on their way back to the planet as Clark was driving through some heavy rains. He was telling Anita that this game is so boring that he was glad that this storm just came all of a sudden. Anita says, "Yes, this is a very boring story for me too. Nobody seems to know what happened to Fairfax, and it seems like everybody at the club is hiding something. I have to go back later," she says, "and investigate further. After hours," she says. Clark says to Anita, "Be very careful, 'cause you don't know what's going on." Anita responds back to Clark. She says, "Clark, don't worry. I'm a big girl and I could take care of myself." Well, back at the Daily Planet, at the newsroom was quiet. Due to being the end of the day, most of everybody went home. The ones who were still there were Clark and Anita and a few other people trying to get their stories finished before the morning edition of the paper. Clark was typing away at his story, getting it all ready and finalized for the morning edition of the paper, while Anita was getting herself ready to do a little sneaking around after dark. Well, later on that night, at the Metro Club golf course, Anita sneaks over the fence and snoops around like a burglar, trying to get inside the club. Well, somehow, someway, she found a window that was unlocked, opened it, and climbed through the window. She was trying to go through offices and other places in the club to see what's going on when all of a sudden the light turned on and a security guard had a gun drawn to her. She turns around to look, and sure enough, she was caught. Meanwhile, back at the Daily Planet building, Clark decided to do some research on his own on the Metro Club. That lead-lined hill piqued his curiosity. He looked through all the records and saw that prior to its construction in the 1950s, during World War II, that area was used as a military storehouse for weapons and vehicles. Then the records revealed that after the Korean War, the area was sold off to a developer who turned it into a golf course and left the old bunkers there, just filled it in so they could act as hills. So now it was all clear to Clark what the 18th hole's hill was. It was probably an old bunker. Then he read further and he saw that Metro Club was bought off by a name that brought up a red flag to him, Enrique Gonzalvo. Clark remembers Enrique Gonzalvo very well. Enrique was a drug lord who tried to muscle into Florida. Well, Superman busted him, and somehow, someway, Gonzalvo got off scot-free. Afterwards, Gonzalvo tried to clean up his public image, and according to the records, he bought majority share of Metro Club, and even started replacing a lot of its longtime staff members with new staff, probably people that worked for Gonzalvo's organization. It was clear Gonzalvo was using Metro Club for some nefarious reason, probably for drug operations. Well, Clark gets up, shuts down his computer, and goes to the janitor's closet. There, he changes into his alter ego Superman, opens the window, and flies out. Soon, Superman arrives at the Metro Club. He quickly switches back to his normal Clark Kent self, and Clark enacted a plan to get caught. Sure enough, he wandered around the golf course, and he tripped a silent alarm. Soon, floodlights flashed on him, and guns pointed at him from security guards. Soon, Clark was taken to a room where he saw Anita, Fairfax, and his caddy were tied to chairs. They quickly forced Clark on a chair and tied him up. Well, sure enough, Enrique Gonzalvo comes in. He says, "Oh, don't tell me, another nosy reporter." Clark said, yes, another nosy reporter, Enrique, as he was being tied up. Suddenly, Enrique remembers Clark and he says, oh, Senor Kent, I remember you. You wrote that very bad story about me in the Daily Planet. Well, guess what? It's time for me to return the favor, compadre, he says, and you're gonna be the first one to die. Well, after they finish tying down Clark, he turns over and asks Anita, Anita, are you okay? Anita said, yes, I'm okay, for now. Well, Gonzalo says to his security guards, go back and make sure there's no other nosy reporter around. Usually when Clark is here, that nosy photographer, what's his name? Whatever his name is, he says, is not far off. Well, after Clark was secured, Gonzalo screams a command for everybody to leave and get the truck to the 18th hole. Well, after the room was vacated, Clark, Anita, Fairfax, and his caddy Mike were all tied to the chair. Anita said, I hope you called the police, Clark, before you came here. Clark says, no, Anita, I actually told Superman before I came here. Anita's like, oh, great, Clark, great. You didn't inform the cops, you informed Superman. Clark says, Anita, I'm not going to argue with you right now over this. Besides, I think there's something over there that I could cut myself free with by the wall. Let me shove the chair over there, he said, and he starts sliding the chair with his legs over to the wall. Then he shouts and he says, I think there is something sharp by the wall, right now rubbing the ropes against it, and it's cutting it. Clark lies as he uses his super strength and snaps the rope where nobody sees him. He then says, all right, I'm free, and he runs over and pretends he's cutting the rope when he was really snapping the rope, freeing everybody else. Then Anita, Fairfax, and his caddy get up, and Clark says to Anita, Anita, call the police and stay here. I'm going out to signal Superman that we're safe. Anita's like, no, Clark, stay here and wait for the police. Clark says, no, Anita, just stay here, watch after Mr. Fairfax. I gotta warn Superman. Clark soon leaves the storeroom where they're all tied up at, and then he goes out and uses his infrared vision to see in the dark and see where everybody was scattered at. He could see the heat signatures of the security guards scattered over the place. He could see also from a distance the heat signature of a giant flatbed truck and several men around by the hill, the 18th hole. Then Clark says, looks like a job for Superman. Then he takes off his glasses, undoes his business suit, and then changes into his alter ego. Superman runs at super speed to take out the security guards that were scattered all over the golf course. After clearing the golf course, then Superman runs over to the 18th hole, where it was there that Gonzalo and the rest of his goons were loading the flatbed truck with all the drugs that were stored inside the hidden bunker at the 18th hole. The door to the 18th hole's hill was hidden. It was made to look like a piece of the hill itself. Gonzalo was there screaming in Spanish for his men to hurry up, when all of a sudden Superman comes running at super speed and takes out all his men in the blink of an eye. Then Gonzalo tries to run, but Superman just runs up behind him at super speed and trips him. Well, the police finally arrived, and Detective Henderson himself led the charge, and they find Gonzalo tied up by the truck at the 18th hole, and the truck half loaded with huge crates of drugs. Well, this time Gonzalo was not going to get off. He had a lot of charges now. He was going away for good. Well, as Anita watched the whole thing and was photographing everything with her phone, Clark comes up to her and asks, Anita, are you okay? She says, yes, Clark, I'm okay. What about you? Clark says, I'm okay too. Well, he asked her the big question, and he says, Anita, can you give me a ride home? She looks at Clark and says, Clark, me give you a ride home? What, you didn't come in your own car? Clark says, no, Superman flew me here once I contacted him when I found out what was going on. She says, okay, Clark, I'll give you a ride home. She even asks, hey, Clark, where's Superman at? Clark says, oh, Superman saves the day and darts off to who knows where. Anita says, typical him. Well, after the police took away everybody, Anita gives Clark the ride home. The ride home for Clark was just engage in hot debate with Anita about the need of Superman and why he's important to Metropolis and the world. Anita sees differently. She does not like Superman, does not trust him, and thinks there's no need for him. Well, they pull up at Clark's house, and Clark tells Anita, well, Anita, thanks for the ride, and I'm glad we all made it safely from that situation. Well, Clark and Anita looked into each other's eyes. There was a brief moment of romance, and what looked like Clark and Anita were about to share a kiss, but then Clark stopped himself. Was like, well, Anita, I gotta go. He gets out the car and shuts the car door and runs to his doorstep and gets inside the house. Anita puts the car in drive and drives off into the night. Inside his house, Clark was upset from what he was about to do. He says to himself, no, 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 Clark, no, not with Anita, not with Anita. Clark grabs a picture of Lois that was in his living room. He looks at the picture of the beautiful Lois Lane. His heart grew heavy with sadness. She was gone, moved far away forever. Clark puts the picture back down, walks over to the wall, and leans his head against the wall. He tells himself, no, Clark, no. You promised yourself never to get involved with another woman. Anita was a beautiful young woman, 10 years younger than him. She had the same tenacity and fire as Lois Lane, but she had a more clearer head. While Lois loved Superman and only regarded Clark as a friend, Anita liked Clark and regarded Superman as a menace. He said to himself, why? And he punches a hole in the wall out of anger. Meanwhile, back at Anita's high-rise apartment, she had finished writing the story out on her laptop. She saves the story and sends it via email to the Daily Planet so it could be put in the morning edition of the paper. Well, she gets up, walks over to her balcony and opens the sliding glass door and steps out. Anita looks out into the Metropolis skyline as a gentle breeze blew over. She was thinking about that moment when Clark nearly kissed her. She was ready, but when Clark backed out, for her was a sign. It was a sign that she was not ready, and it was a sign that Clark was not ready. It's always been evident that Clark was madly in love with Lois. It was well known in the office, and it was well known that Clark never got over Lois moving away. And Anita was in love with Clark, but Clark was 10 years older than her, and he also didn't come from the same background as her. She grew up with the life of privilege. Her father was a wealthy businessman. Clark was just a farm boy. And plus, Clark had a close relationship with a person that she did not like, Superman. Well, Anita decided to go to bed. So she goes to bed, lays down, and stares at the ceiling. All she could do was think about that moment that her and Clark almost kissed. She knew she was developing feelings for Clark. She did not want to. She was trying to fight it. Meanwhile, in his own home, Clark was laying in bed, also staring at the ceiling, fighting his feelings for Anita, thinking about that moment. He knew it. He was falling for her. He didn't want it either, but it was going to be a hard fight. As the two just stared at the ceiling, wondering about each other, wondering what one another was doing right now. Both of them happened at the same time to look at their cell phones charging on their night table. Clark was thinking the same thing Anita was thinking. Should I call her? Should I call him? And coincidentally, both of them decided not to do it. Nah, I'll see him at work in the morning. No, I'll see her at work in the morning. And they laid back down for their sleepless nights. Well, Clark finally was falling asleep around 11 o'clock, and he was dreaming about Anita and dreaming about Lois. But Anita seemed to be taking over the dream. Well, Anita was also dreaming about Clark. She had just fallen asleep around midnight. She was going to be dead tired at work tomorrow. She knew it. She dreaded it. Well, that morning, Clark comes into work and he sits down at his desk, turns on the computer. He sees Jimmy walking by and he says, Jimmy. Jimmy turns to Clark and says, oh, hey, Mr. Kent, how's it hanging this morning? Clark says, I'm doing fine, a little tired from last night. Have you seen Anita around? He asks Jimmy. Jimmy says, oh, Anita called in today. She said she needed a personal day. I guess she was tired from last night's adventure. Clark says, oh, okay. But Jimmy's known Clark for a long time, and he says, Mr. Kent, what's wrong? Clark says, nothing, Jimmy, nothing. Just personal problems. I'll get over it. I always do. Jimmy says, okay, but if you need me, Mr. Kent, I'm always here to listen. Clark says, thanks, Jimmy. I know. You're a great listener. Well, anyways, Clark typed away at his story, typed away at his story, and typed away at his story. He gets up, walks over to the window, and looks out to Metropolis and wonders what Anita was doing. He said to himself, damn it, damn it, damn it, no, Clark, no! But soon, Clark was about to receive even worse news. Dwayne, a female reporter that works with them and was a bitter rival against Lois Lane, comes up to Clark at the window and she says, Clark, did you hear the wonderful news? Clark turns to look and is like, no, I haven't heard the wonderful news. What's going on? She says to Clark, Clark, Lois Lane got engaged. Suddenly, Clark turns around and is like, what? What? Yes, she says, Lois Lane got engaged. Suddenly, Jimmy runs up to her and says, Dwayne, please tell me you didn't tell Clark the bad news. Clark was like, bad news? No, Jimmy, that's good news. He lets out a big smile, shocking Dwayne and Jimmy, and he says, I'm glad that Lois Lane finally moved on from Superman. She actually found a man that she could be with. All she could do was chase after a man that was never available to her, but I'm finally glad she found a man that was available to her. Jimmy was surprised, like, geez Louise, Mr. Kent, you're taking this pretty well. Dwayne was surprised too. He's like, Clark, are you okay? Clark's like, listen, I know everybody knew my reputation around here with Lois, and Lois' reputations around here. It was evident. I chased after her, she chased after another man. Both of us were chasing people who were unavailable to us, who were out of our reach. But you know what? I had one thing always, hope. Hope that, me and her would be together one day. She had hope too. Hope that her and Superman would be together. But guess what? She left Florida and was heartbroken when Superman seemed to ignore her. But I have news. He never ignored her. He just can't be with her. And guess what? I couldn't be with her because she loved a man. I mean, I can't compete against Superman. He's big, he's strong, he's an alien. And I'm just an average, ordinary guy that grew up out in Kansas. So, how could I compete with that? Said Clark. Either way, I'm glad she found somebody. I'm glad she's over Superman. But then Jimmy asked the $1,000,000 question, Mr. Kent, are you over Lois? Clark looks at Jimmy and then looks at Dwayne and he says, yes, I am over her. You know what? I regret that I, for 10 years, chased after a woman who I knew I was never going to get, who I knew was in love with another man. I just got friend zoned by her. But you know what? It's all well, because guess what? I'm over her too, he says. Well, he says, okay, you two, I have to get back to work before Mr. White screams at me. So Clark sits down, types away at his story, then he stops for a moment and thinks. Yes, he was very sad that Lois got engaged, but at the same time, he felt like he was free from chains, free from prison. He was now free to chase after somebody else, and he knew that somebody that he was going to go for now. He was going for Anita, but the question was, in his mind, was this going to end with a happily ever after for him, or was this going to end just like it ended with Lana Lang, just like it ended with Supergirl, just like it ended with Lois Lane, him being alone and miserable, Only time will tell. Like and subscribe. The end.